Hi, good morning. This is Carl Cuesta with ALF Rookie. Can you introduce yourself?
Hey Carl, this is Shep Harris. I'm with Live Oak Bank and I'm a lender in our residential assisted living group.
That's perfect. Yeah, whenever I ask operators, who they use for lending, your name has came up twice. So that's why I was like, okay, let me ask who this guy really is. And, if two people recommend you, then, I need to learn more about you so more people can use you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So um, I'd love to tell you a little bit about how we sort of fit into the residential assisted living space, the
Yes,
services
please.
we offer, where we cover, and things of that nature.
Let's do it. Yeah. So tell me how did you first get into lending and assisted living facilities? Like when did this all start?
Yeah, yeah. So back in 2017, Live Oak Bank, which is a nationwide lender, primarily utilizing the Small Business Administration products to lend to small businesses across the country. But in 2017, we looked at what industry is up and coming. There's a need for it, both now and in the near-term future. What industry is largely misunderstood, and how can we step in and familiarize ourselves with that space and become the prominent lender in the space? So residential assisted living or sort of the way we look at it as non-institutional assisted living was in fact just that. We saw the demographic opportunity long term from an operator's perspective, the need for everyone aging. We are nationwide in scope. With our footprint from a lending perspective, I'm in North Carolina, but we've done them in Texas, we've done them in
Mm.
Arizona, we've done them in Alaska. I mean, we've done them anywhere and everywhere. And so ultimately, we said we want to be in the space where people are owner operators and they are, you know, not the big box store, right? Truly, it's residential and quaint feeling. And the misunderstanding in the space tends to be a lot of banks, freak out when it's a residential zoned business and a house, but and there just becomes this discombobulation of how do we do this thing? And so we just love it. We left and right are doing them. We're doing ground up construction. We're doing acquisitions of existing ones. We're doing renovations of homes, maybe renovation and additions to get one up and running. Really, it's across the whole gamut.
That's incredible. I'm glad you brought up ground up construction. One of my buyers recently reached out to me and said, like, hey, what if we do a ground up construction? What does the lending look like? Like what product would you recommend for this person?
Yeah, most of the time we try to utilize what's called the SBA 7A program.
Hmm.
And the reason for that is a couple of things. Number one, you can use it for almost anything. You can use it to buy the land, the construction hard and soft costs. You can use it for working capital, right?
Hmm.
Um, Furniture, closing costs, like little, almost anything and everything related to the project is eligible under the SBA 7A program. Um, and it also offers pretty desirable debt or loan to value limits. You can do, we largely are doing these at 10% down on the project cost, right? So not 10% of the appraised value, not 10% of just the construction value and the land value, but 10% of everything, the project cost. Um, if the business can support 90% financing, then we do those all day, every day.
That's excellent.
Uh, Sometimes people put down a little more, just depends on a multitude of options. But I mean, we can do them as little as 10% down. So it's a pretty attractive leverage product.
I think that's definitely one of the things that drew people to the 7A, like just a 10% down component of it and the working capital side. My question regarding the new construction and the 7A program is like when do you actually start paying? Do you like when does the repayment start for all
Yeah, it's a
this?
good question. Good question. So when I mentioned almost anything and everything are included or eligible with the project, we also include interest reserve. So during the construction process, we build a line item or a bucket that actually makes your monthly payment on your behalf
Hmm.
based on the dollar amount that's funded on the loan at any given time. So month one, month two, the loan balance is very low. A little tiny bit of interest is paid from your loan proceeds.
Hmm.
As you get further along down the line, your balance starts to creep up as you are largely completed with the construction project. We still make that, we're still making that payment on your behalf. So the budget includes the interest reserve during construction. And then
Makes
in addition, the working capital piece is largely miss or undersized on these projects if you work with someone that's not familiar with, you know, the pre-opening and marketing needs,
mm-hmm.
licensure process, which can take, it doesn't matter if the state tells you 30 days, it's not going to be 30 days, right? It's
Yeah.
just the nature of the beast. Meanwhile, you're staffing it 24/7 the whole time because you have to be in order to pass licensure. So we even build in an interest reserve to make your payment for multiple months while you're operating. It's our goal to make sure you have sufficient interest reserve to
Mm-hmm.
make your payment while constructing it and while filling it up until you have sufficient revenue to make the payment on your own. That's the goal.
Wow. Like what does the time frame usually look like? Like is it just based on like per project, per the construction
Yeah,
manager?
so we look at the general contractor's construction budget. They'll list out, basically the dollar amount they think it'll be. They'll also say we expect it to be, 9 months or 12 months from mobilization to a certificate of occupancy.
Mm-hmm.
Look at the state and what their expectation is on licensure. Again, we probably add a little bit there because it's not always on time.
No, it's not.
Um, so yeah, it really is project specific, and that really applies whether it's ground up construction or a $300,000 renovation.
That's good to know. Yeah, because that was one of the fears. Like, what if, I take this massive loan out and, construction's always delayed, at least here in Texas it is. And then licensure, they'll tell people, I've heard 6 months, yes, but like more than often I've heard close to a year to get construction. I mean, to get licensing done. So that's why I was like, oh man, so I could be looking at 2 years of paying this loan. Like, I don't know if it's something that someone can handle.
Yeah, and that's sometimes is why it's really the state is the one that's controlling the timeline, to be frank. Your GC can do it in whatever time they say they can, and you can bid that out, but you're just be held to the state. And if they're busy at any given time, it's probably going to be longer. There are
Hmm.
ways you can pay to expedite the process in Texas.
Hmm.
You mentioned Texas, and we're pretty familiar with projects there. We always recommend doing that. Um, it really sometimes people end up putting a little more down when I mentioned earlier, just because the interest starts to add up, the interest expense starts to add up. So sometimes it is necessary to put a little more down because you can't afford so much debt. But
Hmm.
that's part of what we're looking at. We have hundreds of these things in our portfolios. We know how well they can perform. We can aggregate the data. We can, we'll look at your projections and then we'll normalize it with our portfolio. We can look at it in Texas. We can look at it nationally.
Hmm.
And, we feel pretty confident on our adjustments to projections if or when that's needed.
That's excellent. So, let's say for me, I approach you and say, "Hey, I want to acquire this assisted living facility that's already established." From that, like, how long does that time frame look like? Because, I always hear like, "Hey, SBA takes so long. I don't know if I want to work with, that kind of loan." Like, in your experience, what does that time frame usually look like?
Yeah, good question. So first, I'm going to mention that it's important to work with a bank like Live Oak that has a preferred lending partner status.
Hmm.
So we truly have a designation that allows us to underwrite, approve, and fund the loan in-house. We don't have to package it up and ship it off to SBA. So
Okay,
that
good.
speeds it up. A preferred
Yes.
lending partner is important. Live Oak is one and has been one for a long time. I think we're going on the seventh year in a row where we've done the most SBA dollar volume lending in the country. We just continue to knock it out of the park compared to competition. So working with a bank that's super familiar with SBA and has the PLP designation is important. Number two, I would argue that working with a bank that you're confident in understands the residential assisted living space is important.
Hmm.
A lot of times the lender will say, "Yeah, well, we love your business. We'll do it." But then when the credit request goes to the back office, to the credit administrators that have the keys to the vault, they might get a little squirrely. Remember, residential is zone, business, it's a house, but wait, there's people, in the communication
Yeah.
and dysfunction, and doesn't always yield the return or the message that the borrower wants. And so working with a bank that's familiar with the space and SBA is extremely important. And then from our perspective, if you're buying an existing one that's up and running, it's about a 2.5 month process.
Okay.
There's really three phases to it. There's the loan proposal or the pre-approval that takes
Mm-hmm.
about a week.
Mm-hmm.
There's the underwriting and credit approval, so the formal commitment, the formal approval that takes about 2 more weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's the funding process that takes about 7 weeks. So all in all, about 10 weeks, which is about 2.5 months.
Okay. It's pretty quick. It's pretty quick. Yeah. In terms of like challenges that you guys face, like what is a common challenge and then is there a solution to it?
Yeah, I would say the biggest challenge is probably on the construction side. Um, a lot of times we're engaged earlier in the process and someone hasn't identified the land. Well, that's a problem. We don't know if you're going to be in this part of town or this part of town. Are you going to fetch 5,000 a month per senior or 7,000 a month per senior? That really affects your projections,
Mm-hmm.
the amount that you can likely borrow. The second is maybe they've found their land, but um, they don't have their plans and specs, or they don't have any level of permitting, or they haven't talked to the municipality in any, you know, at all or
Yeah.
any extent. And so I would say the biggest, you know, reason things take longer is largely because the borrower's not ready, not shovel ready.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't mind that. We don't mind, being a sounding board and a resource throughout the planning stages of the project. We think we can be of value there. And so we're happy to be involved, even if it takes you 3 to 6 months because you haven't fully figured out all or don't have all of your ducks in a row.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of, so I guess it is truly different than like new construction versus already established. The timing for that is just shorter, I guess.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, well that makes sense. So another thing I was curious about, like I know with SBA there's a lot of products out there. You mentioned the 7A. Is there another product and when would those be appropriate for like which part of
Yeah.
that left
Yeah.
process?
Good question. So there is a second product that is used outside of the 7A, that's called a 504 product,
Mm-hmm.
SBA 504. In this space, it's not utilized as much because of a couple of things. Number one, for a startup, you can only do 80% loan to cost, not 90, and it's only 80% of eligible costs. So
Mm-hmm.
what's stripped out of the eligible project cost on a 504
Mm-hmm.
are all of your working capital and lease up interest reserves. So to your point, once you hit 6 months or once you hit certificate of occupancy, all of those interest payments until you get fully licensed, all of the working capital needed to pay staff while you're going through preliminary licensing and ultimately final licensing has to be paid out of pocket.
Oof.
So even when we say it's 80% loan to cost, it's really 80. It's not really 80. It's almost probably like 70,
Mm-hmm.
75 if you're lucky. Um, so it's just a different, it's just a more capital intensive product. So if you have excess cash you want to put down or have the ability to put in, it's a great product. Um, if you're looking for a little more leverage, then the 7A one is.
Mm-hmm.
504 takes a little longer too. So when I mentioned earlier that preferred lending partner, no bank has preferred lending partner on a 504 project. So unfortunately, you do have to package it up and sort of ship it off to SBA, and you just sort of wait and see what happens on the timeline there. You
Mm-hmm.
can probably imagine, there's no telling.
Yeah, it could be a minute then. It could
But
be.
if I will say this, if you own the land and the land or the property is not contingent on a seller, then you have more time, right? There's a third party that's expecting the change in ownership piece. If you don't own the land, the 7A product largely is the way to go, regardless of the leverage you're looking for, if you have a seller that's expecting a timeline to be reasonable.
Mhm. Like the reason I asked about that one as well, and when it would be appropriate is because in terms of like rates, I've always heard that one is always higher than the other one.
That's right. So the 504 rate, It's technically two loans on a 504 structure,
Hmm.
but the average rate when you combine the two loans on the 504 is a better interest rate than that on the 7A product.
Hmm.
And so again, if you have time to wait for a 504 product, that's a great opportunity. If you own a current residential assisted living and have an SBA 7A loan on it today, you should talk to us about a refinance with a 504 product because there's no seller involved. You own it. You can move it whatever timeline or pace you want to. That's
Hmm.
the perfect time to use it. So there's no question it's a better rate. But again, if it's a startup, do you have 25 or 30% to put down? Great. Then do that. If you
Hmm.
control the land, you can move at that pace. If
Hmm.
you want to take advantage of leverage, then use the 7A product. You might have a little higher interest rate, but you didn't have to raise money from investors and dilute your ownership.
Hmm.
Which is more important, owning more of it yourself or a better interest rate. And that may differ for one person versus another.
That's a good tip. I like that. I like that. Well, Shep, these are great options and products, and I definitely know that my viewers are gonna have faith in working with someone like you that's been doing it for a while. What is the best way to reach you?
Yeah, I appreciate that. We appreciate it. Probably best thing would be email shep.harris at liveoak.bank.
Okay.
You can always find me on LinkedIn, things like that as well. You could find us on our website, liveoakbank.com. But yeah, any of that works just fine.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you, Shep. Well, I appreciate your time and talk to you again in the near future.
Thanks, Carl. Take care.
Take care.